Who were the biggest winners and losers from the Baltimore Ravens 2023 stadium practice? We talk about that and so much more come up next here on this episode of Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast here. I am your host, Kevin Oestreicher of Ravens Wire, and we're here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you, as always, for being here with me today, making Locked On Ravens your first listen each and every day. We're free and available all podcasting platforms. It also includes in video form on YouTube, where we did a live show on Saturday after the Ravens stadium practice. So if you want to catch those live shows, turn notifications on, and they will be in audio form after the fact. It's the same show, both audio and video form, so you're not missing out if you want to watch 2 days a week and then listen 3 days a week. I appreciate all the audio and video listeners, whether you're in every day or you tune in every day. If it's your first time, welcome in. And if you're somewhere in the middle, welcome back to the show. And we bring you the best daily Ravens content here, and we're going to be diving into winners and losers from the Ravens stadium practice. It was a big deal, right? Fans in the stands, Odell Beckham Jr.'s first time in the bank. We'll talk about who impressed, who didn't impress as much, and what it means moving forward. I also want to look at early training camp takeaways. We're 4 days into training camp now. Obviously, here on Monday, this will be day 5. The pads come on today, so this will be interesting. We'll do some takeaways from the first day of pads on tomorrow's show, so be sure to stay tuned for that. But there's a lot to talk about in terms of just what you can take away early on. And obviously you're not going to it's not the be all end all of what happens over the first 4 days, but you can take away something here, something there that could maybe mean something. So we'll talk about that in the second part of the show. Then finally, I want to do a segment on just who I maybe want to see more of or hear more of, guys who haven't gotten a lot of early buzz, but people who I'm still excited, players who I'm still excited about moving forward. So let's take a look first at winners and losers from the stadium practice, a brief overview. What happened on Saturday. It was a scorcher out there, and then it decided to absolutely storm right around like 4 p.m., 4:30 p.m., kind of right after I finished the live show, actually. But when the players were out there, it was a scorcher. There were different types of legends who showed up, Jimmy Smith, Dannell Ellerbe, who was my favorite Raven of all time personally. And then you also had Vonta Leach coming in and talking on the Ravens broadcast. And you could hear the excitement. Odell Beckham comes out to the loud cheers. Lamar comes out to the loud cheers. And it was a practice that, I don't necessarily think had the most energy ever, but you could sense there was an excitement for the players just to be back at M&T Bank Stadium and in the stadium practicing in front of fans. Now, in terms of actual winners and what I saw overall, we'll start with the winners first. I think Lamar Jackson was a big winner. And again, I think a winner means different things for different people. Like for Lamar, it's not like, oh, Lamar's a winner. He's in a better position to earn a roster spot. No. Come on, we know who Lamar Jackson is. Lamar was a winner in the fact that he looked good for the most part, was able to connect with his receivers. I mean, Odell Beckham Jr. and Lamar seem to be establishing a pretty nice connection early on. Mark Andrews and Lamar Jackson, that connection hasn't gone anywhere. Those were two of my takeaways. We'll talk about those a little bit more in the second part of the show. But I thought Lamar looked good. Had a nice touch pass to Odell Beckham. A few plays where he scrambled, and the one play where he scrambled it. Look, if they were able to touch him, the defense, it would have been a sack probably. But look, we don't know because Lamar has made wine from nothing before. He's turned nothing into something. So there's a play. I posted it on my Twitter. It got a lot of engagement. It was a really crazy play from him. I also think the winner was two running backs, Gus Edwards and Justice Hill. We've heard a lot about how the Ravens are going to utilize their running backs out of the backfield this year in terms of pass catchers, right? Hopefully J.K. Dobbins, when he comes back, whenever that's going to be. But Edwards, Justice Hill, maybe Melvin Gordon, Keaton Mitchell. But Edwards, we saw him catch a few passes, had a nice long run. I thought Edwards had a pretty good day. And Justice Hill, I thought, had a good day too. He popped off the field to me when looking at just like guys who looked fast and looked energetic and looked like they had a little something to them. Justice Hill felt that way to me, had a couple of nice runs and also just looked super shifty on the field. And I'm super excited about Justice Hill and what could be, he could have a pretty increased role this year. I mentioned Odell. I thought he was a pretty big winner overall. Made a couple of really nice catches, a touchdown from Lamar Jackson, as we talked about, made a nice little diving catch there as well. He's laying it all out on the line. I know some people don't really want to see that right now. They want to have him save the body. So, we'll see. But I think that Odell had a really, really good day on Saturday. Then I think this was a tight end day. Mark Andrews, I thought, was really good. We know that connection. I talked about it a little. That connection with Lamar is not going anywhere. It was on full display on Saturday. Isaiah Likely had a great, great day, catching passes, catching touchdowns. He was all over the place. And Travis Vokolek, an undrafted player, I expect the Ravens to keep 3 tight ends. But if you're looking for maybe a 4th practice squad tight end, I'd previously toyed with the idea of putting Ben Mason there if you want to classify him as such. I think Vokolek's made a pretty nice name for himself. He looked good also on Saturday. Now, it wasn't a great day for the offensive line. We'll talk about that in just a couple minutes. But I thought Tyler Linderbaum did have a good day. Had a couple of really nice reps and is really building on what was a really good rookie season for him. And I think it's going to be incredible during his second season. Now, again, we'll probably still get overpowered a little bit by some of the bigger, like super strong strength guys on the defensive line, but he has strength himself. People look at his size, and again, I don't dock for size as much as other people do, but people look at his size and say, oh, he's not strong, and how is he going to hold up against any defensive lineman? Well, he held up pretty well last year. I think he's going to hold up pretty well this year too. Defensive line also, front 7 guys I thought played well. Justin Madubuike, Travis Jones, Michael Pierce, you can throw in this conversation. 2 big winners for me. I thought that Madubuike had a couple nice reps. Travis Jones was, super strong guy. I think Michael Pierce, there was a nugget on the broadcast. Michael Pierce said that Travis Jones is the strongest guy on the entire team. And Michael Pierce is a strong dude. He was also standing up some guys. I thought the defensive line had a really good day. And David Ojabo, and you can even put it off at OA in this conversation too. Those guys I thought had really solid days. David Ojabo looked quick out there, looked fast, looked like he's really coming along. And I think that for Ojabo and Owe both, it's really important for them to, I think, get the momentum early. I think both those guys definitely did it on Saturday. But I thought Ojabo popped off the page for me too. Some losers stock down for me. If you want to, either way, same deal. I thought Sam Mustipher was a pretty big loser. He was and again, I always preface it by saying when I call them losers, I don't mean, oh yeah, that dude's such a loser, right? No, his stock is down. I guess that's a better way to say it. But Sam Mustipher, I would say, lost on Saturday. There were a lot of Bears fans once I put out my stock up, stock down on Twitter and ended up saying, oh, this is the funniest thing I've ever seen because, Bears fans know how bad he is. I wasn't expecting a lot, but it was almost the same thing like the Alejandro Villanueva signing, where Steelers fans were rejoicing when the Ravens signed him. And it was kind of the same thing with Bears fans with Mustipher. He didn't have a great day. I thought Saleh also didn't have a great day on Saturday. The offensive line as a whole didn't have a great day. And look, this is early on. The pads aren't on yet. So once the pads come on, I think a lot changes. And we'll talk about that throughout the course of the show today and throughout the rest of the week. But I think pads do make a difference. So I'm willing to cut the offensive line some slack, but I thought Saleh looked a bit slow. Cole Jackson, who's in front of the show, said his hands looked a little slow and weren't really where they needed to be. But that's to be expected for a guy who, when he was drafted, has the tools, the athleticism, the strength, etc. But his, needs some refining overall. So that's not a necessarily huge deal. James Prochet, there were a couple balls thrown his way that he wasn't able to come up with. I know some people have him in the loser category. People had Tylan Wallace in the loser category, but I thought Wallace made a nice catch. Tyreek Black had a nice catch. I thought Kyle Hamilton had a pretty solid day overall. So it was nice to see these guys out there on the field at M&T Bank Stadium. Again, it's just a training camp practice here, but there are plenty of things you can take away early on. John Harbaugh spoke to the media after practice, said that Zay Flowers probably is going to return today on Monday. So hopefully that's the case. Ravens re-signed Trayvon Mullen after releasing him with a failed to disclose physical condition designation, which I'd never seen before. But again, it was a really, I'd say I called it like the offense struggled early on. Justin Tucker, I think, missed one from 65 and then went 1 of 2 from 60. So I thought the offense struggled early, but then got it together late, and the defense had a pretty balanced day overall. There was one play where Odell, we didn't get to see the whole play, but Odell put a move on Marlon Humphrey, kind of swatted and swam over Humphrey. And I think the ball was thrown, like Lamar threw to Mark Andrews. It wasn't thrown in that direction. But I would have really liked to see that rep. And see who would have won it, because Odell got the start, but Humphrey gained ground on him. But we never got to see the rep finish because Lamar didn't throw it that way. So stadium practice is always exciting. It's always fun to talk about. And again, winners and losers from a stadium practice doesn't mean the guys make the roster or don't make the roster. There's still plenty of time, plenty of preseason games, joint practices, etc., to make a name for themselves here. But coming up, we will take a look at some early training camp takeaways. I think is important too, even though there's still a lot of time left. You can look at what we've kind of seen from now and see what is going on. So be sure to stay tuned. Plenty to talk about still on Locked On Ravens. But first, this episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. And take your first swing at betting MLB on FanDuel and get 10 times your first bet amount in bonus bets up to $200. That's right. Just bet $20 and you'll land $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. That's $200 you can spend betting everything from the money line to the over-under to who you think is going to be the first home run hitter. And, for the Orioles, they're on a tear. You could bet Adley Rutschman. You can go Gunnar Henderson. There are plenty of options. It's all on an app that's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Plus, when you can get paid instantly. There's no better place to bet on MLB than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So sign up today and visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, official partner of Major League Baseball. We're back here. Our second segment of Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher still here with you on this Monday. I appreciate everybody tuning in. Another week of Baltimore Ravens training camp content. It's exciting. It doesn't feel like football's in the air. It is. And I know we're just a practice. We're not to regular season games, even preseason games at this point, but it's just nice to have football back and feeling like we're so close to the start of games. And even though it's only been 4 days up to this point, obviously I mentioned today is day 5 and the first day of pads coming on, and pads do change everything, but we can still take away stuff from what went on earlier in training camp, the first 4 days without pads. I think one of the things, and I mentioned this earlier in the first part of the show, but Lamar's connections with these guys, they're going to be super important and they're developing, but he's already developed. Like with Mark Andrews, for example, I think all offseason I've said this, the fact that with Odell coming in, them drafting Zay Flowers, even bringing in Nelson Aguilar, Todd Monk, and the whole new offense, I think everybody's kind of forgotten about the tight ends a little bit, Mark Andrews, and how dominant that connection is between Lamar and Mark Andrews. Now, we saw it put on display in the stadium practice and obviously through practices throughout the first couple of days, but that connection hasn't gone anywhere. I think what adding Odell, adding Zay Flowers, adding Aguilar, the new offense, what that does for that connection in particular is it takes pressure off of it. I remember back in 2019, my first season doing this show, and we're coming up on 4 years here in a couple of weeks of me hosting Locked On Ravens Side Point. It's kind of crazy to think about. I remember doing those shows in my first season hosting this show, and every week, whether it was previewing the shows on Friday or doing our crossover Thursdays, we would say, all right, well, what week is it going to be? Whose week is it going to be this week? And even this was in 2022 because Marquise Brown was still at the team. You could even say it in 2021 when Marquise Brown was still there. Is it going to be a Mark Andrews week or is it going to be a Marquise Brown week? Because there were only 2 options you could defend on the field who were, I guess, the top options. You had other guys too, but they weren't instilling fear in your hearts or anything. So when defenses decided to key on Mark Andrews, Marquise Brown would have a big week. When teams decided to key on Marquise Brown, Mark Andrews would have a big week. Now, last season, what we saw is with Andrews and the injuries kind of slowing him down a little bit with the injuries to the wide receiver group, the only player who was a huge threat on the Ravens offense passing-wise was Mark Andrews. Teams knew that. They sent the house at him. They threw the house at him, threw the kitchen sink, everything they had at him. And I think that diminished the production for Mark Andrews because as good as Mark Andrews is, as amazing as he is, it's hard when you're getting that much attention every single snap, every single week. With Odell, Zay Flowers, Rashad Bateman coming back, Devin Duvernay coming back, even Isaiah Likely, the new offense, the connection between Lamar and Mark Andrews, I think this could be the best year for them yet. And that's saying something because of the years they've already had. Now, it might not mean as much production in terms of, he's going to get like 1,200 yards and 12 touchdowns. Things should be distributed a bit more. But in terms of efficiency, I think a big takeaway here is that the efficiency between those two honestly is probably going to go up because of the attention that's going to be taken off of them. But with the connection that's already established and we've seen early on in training camp this year, that's what I'm excited about. And it was kind of the same thing with Lamar's 2019 year, the MVP season, right? We saw the stats that were off the charts. And what I had said was the pure numbers, touchdown number, right? The yard number, that's probably going to go down, but the efficiency should go up. And some efficiency numbers did, some efficiency numbers didn't. But that's what I was kind of talking about in that regard. I think another takeaway I've had is that the offensive line is going to take some time. Honestly, the offense in general is going to take some time. And again, pads do create a different element out in practice where you can be a lot more physical and, kind of display your skill set a little more. But this is a new offense, new players coming in. You're trying to figure out your left guard position at this point. Like, to me, it's fine if the offense struggles early on in camp. It's fine if they even struggle late into training camp. That's going to be what happens. LaDainian Tomlinson, former NFL running back, said that he expects by the mid part of the season, the regular season, the Ravens offense is going to be hitting on all cylinders. We saw it with the defense last year, right? It takes some time to get fully acclimated in a game setting to a new system. And part of that is just getting everything out in training camp, right? Getting as many mistakes out as you can, learning as much as you can in training camp. And I think Todd Monken's approach with not giving Lamar the wristband and having him, recite the stuff back to him and rely on his mind instead of just reading off the play sheet or the wristband, that's going to be, come December, right? Or even early on in the season. I think honestly could have more of an impact early on in the season where, he's not flipping through it, scanning the wristband, trying to figure out everything. He has stuff in his mind. That to me is really important, but it's okay to me if the offense takes some time, if the offensive line, like you have 4 or 5 starters returning from the offensive line, but it takes some time. And if you want to have the guys who are competing for the left guard job just kind of, work through their skill sets, what do we have here? What do we have there? If that's what the Ravens are saying to themselves, that's okay because they still have so much time for that. And it's okay in that case. Also, I think another takeaway I've had is that once the offense gets clicking, it's going to be fun. It's going to be fun. We saw at the training camp practice, the stadium practice on Saturday, the Ravens were on a screen. And that reminded me like, oh, wow, the Ravens really did not run screens, did not run trick plays. And I think we've heard the Ravens players kind of be on the side and even the coaches be on the side of, well, you have to have some trickeration in there, keep the defense on their toes. I think we will see that. I think it's going to be fun. I mean, a huge early takeaway for me is Zay Flowers is electric. I mean, absolutely electric. We haven't seen him over the past couple of days because of the illness he's been working through. But, he's somebody that I'm super, super excited about moving forward because, again, it's almost like it's not exactly the same, but it's similar to what we were talking about with Mark Andrews just a bit earlier, where with Odell, with Rashad Bateman, with Mark Andrews and all those guys, Flowers being your third wide receiver, you can put him in the slot. I guess you can put him on the outside, but I wouldn't. I'd rather use him in the slot. But it's just exciting to know that you have a player as electric as that, where the route running is off the charts. He glides through his routes. I'm really, really excited to see Zay Flowers this year personally. I think defensively, when you're looking at early takeaways, I'm expecting a big year 2 jump from Kyle Hamilton. We've seen that on the field. I think Brandon Stevens has the potential to play both some nickel corner this year and safety. I know John Harbaugh did say that we're probably going to see him more at safety, but I would expect him to maybe at least compete for some snaps in the nickels. We've seen a big takeaway for me is I think David Ojabo and Odafe Owe are more ready than I thought they were. It's always a big risk to rely on guys, obviously Ojabo, which I've always said this is essentially his rookie season after only playing in 1 game last year. But with Ojabo, someone who showed all the promise in the world during his rookie season, then kind of took a step back. It's risky to bank on unproven talent. But I do think that they're more ready than I thought they were, and maybe some others thought they were as well. Now, I would still like to see them sign a veteran. I don't think their approach is just to go into the season with those guys. You can do it, but it's a risk. But I think that at the end of the day, Baltimore is in better shape than I thought. I don't know how much of a better shape they're in now, but they're in better shape than I thought with the Ojabo and Owe, just because I think they're further ahead now than I thought they were, which is it's great. That's what I want. I want guys to be further ahead than I thought. I think secondary-wise, one of my takeaways, well, we know Marlon Humphrey. Rock Ya-Sin looks good out there, but we need to see more. Not that I'm saying the guys have been playing. I mean, Jalen Armour-Davis, he's a guy that needs to step up. Pepe Williams, apparently he's probably going to be the first guy coming off the PUP list, so we'll see what he does. Darius Washington's had some nice days. I think Baltimore, one of my takeaways, I think Baltimore has these underrated players that can do really well this year and exceed expectations. There's exceeding expectations, then there's just blowing them out of the water. Players like a Keaton Mitchell or an Ardarius Washington or who's another guy I don't even know. who's another player. Like even like a Saleh, for example, if he ends up winning that starter job, Travis Vokolek, Charlie Kohler, right? With some of those guys, like they can exceed expectations in roles where the Ravens need them, like where they really, really need them. So there's a lot to take away early on. Again, it's not the be all end all. We're gonna learn a lot more over the course of this week, and obviously once the joint practices, the preseason games come along, it'll be exciting. So we will still have something to take away, still have something to talk about. But those are my early non-padded practices of training camp takeaways. But coming up in the final part of the show, I'll talk a little bit about who I want to see a bit more of, in terms of who we haven't heard a lot about so far over the course of training camp. So be sure to stay tuned. Plenty to talk about on Locked On Ravens. We're back here, our final segment of Locked On Ravens. Kevin Allstriker still here with you, talking, of course, Ravens football. I appreciate everybody for being here with me today, making Locked On Ravens your first listen every day, of course. And it's been great. It's been a crazy wild ride here. I'm excited to keep it going for what's going to, I've done 2019, 2020, 2021, 2022. This is technically my fifth season. It'll be my fourth year hosting the show in just a couple weeks, mid-August, and it's been crazy. I'm also starting up Instagram and Facebook again. I want to get more content out there for more people, hopefully direct more people to this show. So you can throw me a follow on Instagram. I'm starting it up today. So, we'll do show updates. I'll post stuff on there content-wise. So if you want to follow me over on Instagram at KaosStriker34. Also, Facebook is just my name, the same profile picture I have on Twitter. So I'll be doing that alongside Twitter still. It was a huge Twitter weekend for a lot of people just because the Ravens are doing so much. But let's now get into a little bit of who I want to see more of. And because I say this doesn't mean they're doing badly in practice. It's just like we haven't heard a lot about them. And they're players I'm high on. I want to see how they're doing, and just hopefully we'll get to see these guys step up, because usually, guys who were at practice, the media who was there, we'll get some updates on guys like Keaton Mitchell's had a couple good days, or Darius Washington's had a couple good days. But there are certain players that, I want to hear more about. Like, I want to hear how they're doing. And this is, again, it's not a slight to the people who are there. Please don't take it that way. It's just guys who I want to see and hear about, because I think they can be really important pieces to the Ravens and what they do this season. So I guess we'll just go position by position. Anthony Brown is someone that was interesting. I think if I'm not mistaken, Josh Johnson was taking the third quarterback snaps. It was Lamar, Tyler Huntley, and then Josh Johnson. Anthony Brown is someone who I'm super high on. I think he can have a really big impact for the Ravens this year. Now, hopefully he doesn't have to, because Lamar will hopefully stay healthy for a full season. But in the event that Lamar gets injured again, and again, please, I do not want that to happen. Please, Lamar, do not get injured. But I think that if it comes down to it, I think Anthony Brown at this point has more potential to win games than Tyler Huntley. I know that might be a hot take to some, but that's how I feel about it. And we haven't heard a lot about him. So Anthony Brown, some guy I'm pretty intrigued by. I think running back wise, we've heard a lot about Keaton Mitchell. Maybe Ben Mason is someone like, I'm super intrigued by Ben Mason. I don't know what it is about him. I don't know what it is about the position, but the fact that we heard some buzz about him during OTAs and minicamp, Ben Mason is someone who I'm intrigued by. Wide receiver wise, Dante Demas is a player that I really like. I think with his 6'4" frame, the Ravens don't have that in their wide receiver room. Their receivers aren't guys. Now, they're contested catch guys. Like, they'll go up and get footballs, but they don't have the body that Dante Demas does. So I know, for example, the Ravens had Miles Boykin. He was in that, like, what was he, 6'3"? He might have been 6'4", 6'3" or 6'4", but he didn't play like that. He, played like he was 5'11", wouldn't go up, catch balls, and obviously that did not work out in Baltimore for him being a pick in 2019 and a Notre Dame third-round guy. So I think Dante Demas has a potential because he plays like he's big. So that's someone I'm excited about. Travis Vokolek intrigues me. We've heard about Travis Vokolek, though. So I think, maybe Charlie Kohler, someone who we did hear a little bit about. I mean, he made some catches, too. I thought Charlie Kohler had a couple big plays during training camp so far, but maybe a little more about Charlie Kohler. Daniel Falele, someone we haven't heard a lot about, right? Like, I feel like we haven't heard a ton about him. I'm wondering how he's doing in figuring out stuff. I think Ben Cleveland was working, as the backup right guard at the stadium practice. We haven't really heard a ton about him. It's been the Saleh show in terms of what we've been hearing from the offensive line, at least the left guard position there. On the defensive line, but we haven't heard a ton about Broderick Washington. I haven't heard a ton about Travis Jones. During the stadium practice, Jones had a great day, but I think Washington, we haven't really heard a ton about him. Inside linebackers, I don't know. We haven't heard a ton about Patrick Queen. I don't think that's a bad thing. Like, it's harder without pads for some positions. I think inside linebacker is one of those. So we haven't heard a ton about, Patrick Queen. Trenton Simpson is someone I'm really intrigued to see just, where they're lining him up. And, hopefully we'll be able to see a little bit more out of him. Malik Harrison, all those guys at that position. And then corner-wise, I mean, I think Jalen Armour-Davis is someone, hopefully Trayvon Mullen when he comes off the NFI list where he's on right now. I don't know where to classify Brandon Stevens, but I'd like to hear about Brandon Stevens. I'd like to figure out what he's been doing and what he's been up to. And then Geno Stone, I think Stone had an interception in one of the training camp practices, but he's somebody. And then honestly, Kyle Hamilton too. I'm intrigued to know about Kyle Hamilton a little bit and figure out, what his plans are for this year and, figuring out what his role is going to be, because with Chuck Clark leaving does leave a pretty big void in that Baltimore secondary, despite what some people think about him, which is, he wasn't that great of a player. I thought he was fine personally, but, I think for Baltimore, Hamilton's going to play a really big role this year for them. And then we haven't, I remember rookie year, Jordan Stout, right? People were talking all about Jordan Stout. Haven't heard a ton about Jordan Stout this year. That's not to say he's been doing bad at training camp, but and again, he's a punter, and no disrespect to punters. I don't want it to be taken that way, but sometimes punters don't get as much coverage as some of the other positions, but it felt like Jordan Stout was getting some coverage last year. We haven't seen that this year so far. So those are players I'm just intrigued to see and intrigued to hear more about. I'm intrigued by those guys because I feel like they can help Baltimore in, again, a really big way this year. But with pads coming on today, it's exciting. The physicality gets ramped up a little bit more. There has not been a training camp fight to this point. We've seen a couple. Orlando Brown, there's been a former Ravens fight with Orlando Brown Jr. in Bengals camp, putting some pretty nasty scratch, claw marks on Trey Hendrickson's neck. Hendrickson signed a contract with Cincinnati, and in the picture, he just has these, what essentially looks like bear claws. It's just huge red marks on his neck. But with physicality, the heat as well. Obviously, I think joint practices are going to be a nice change of pace with the Commanders. Those are coming up, and those will be exciting as well. But it's a step, right? You start off just ramping up during training camp, during the non-padded portion of everything, and then you move up to the padded practices, and those are increased in intensity and in physicality. And then you also move into the joint practices, preseason, regular season. And there's a lot. Again, I don't know how much, like Odell's ramp-up period, for example. Are they going to ramp back up Zay Flowers after the illness, or is he just full go? How are they going to ramp up guys like J.K. Dobbins and Rashad Bateman when they come back? Those are two huge pieces of the Ravens. So all these different burning questions, I guess, in terms of how each player can be utilized and what their plans are. Because, look, for example, if J.K. Dobbins isn't back until maybe the third game of the preseason, I don't expect him to play, but if he's not back on the practice field by then, are they going to ramp him up, and is that going to impact his snaps week 1 or week 2 and in the early part of the season? So I'm really excited for what the Ravens can do this season. Obviously, they can't just be a paper team. They can't be paper champs. They've had a good offseason, but they have to translate that to paper, or from paper to the field. So we'll see what ends up happening there. But thank you so much for tuning into Locked On Ravens. I appreciate everybody who listened or watched today. Again, be sure to subscribe for free, both in audio form and video form. We're, of course, going to be coming at you tomorrow with more Ravens content here, talking about the first padded practice of training camp. So be sure to stay tuned for that. I'll see you right back here tomorrow on Locked On Ravens.